Hi, and welcome to another episode of the ARC podcast with Jen and Lindsay. How are you doing today, Jen?
Hi, I'm good, Lindsay. How are you?
Doing good. We've got some special guests today. Do you want to introduce them?
Yes, I'm thrilled to. These guests we have today are full of all the information you guys need. So Lindsay and I can just sit back and relax, and they will just take on the show. And I have the president and CEO of the Arc of Ohio, Gary Tonks, and I have the executive vice president, David Lewis, here today, here to discuss and try to keep it to the wonderful world of waivers. So I'm sure many of you have heard this discussion before. Hopefully you have. If you haven't seen it in person, I very much recommend that you see them because they are a wealth of information and you're usually there afterwards to help talk to you about your own family stuff. And that's where I've gotten so much of I think that's where I met you, Gary, was at A Wonderful World of Waiver talk
Down
here
Syndrome
in Cincinnati.
Association. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And so I'm just thrilled to have them here, Lindsay and I, and we are going to just ask Gary, Dave, give us some updates on the wonderful world of waivers in Ohio. Who wants to start? Dave?
And we can.
Sure, I'll start. I'll start right as Gary starts talking. Well, thanks for having us. This is pretty neat. I'm glad we finally had a chance to get on the podcast with you guys because I know there's lots of information that families need. So I'm going to do a little history on the ARC, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So the ARC was started by parents, mainly moms, back in around 1952, 1953-ish. And I say that because there's the difference between the state registration and the IRS stuff. But officially around 1952, we'll say. But mainly started by moms who wanted services for their kiddos, right? So back in those days when you went towards the county board system or school systems, there was no services. So they basically would tell you to take your kids home. There's no services. So those parents fought for the development of services as we sort of know them today. Of course, a lot of things have changed over the years, but just a little snippet of history there. And we're going to talk about waivers today. So, Gary, you want to jump in? I know you do. You're chomping at the bit.
That's me.
He's getting antsy.
Yeah. So when the ARC started, the only thing available was really a state institution. Back in the 1950s, there wasn't even an availability to go to school. So the ARC created the first schools and really started out because if you gave birth to a child with Down syndrome, for example, chances are really good your doctor told you to institutionalize them and forget you ever had the child. So we were created as a reaction to that. The only thing available was state institutions. And then back clear into the 1970s, institutions were pretty much the only thing that was available. County boards were created in 1967, and they used local dollars to support Ohioans with disabilities, children through adulthood. In the 60s and into the 70s, the county boards actually ran separate schools for kids with disabilities. But until the Reagan administration in the 1980s, you could use your Medicaid card to purchase an institution. And if you were in a county that was affluent enough, you could probably get locally funded services. But back in the mid-1980s, when Ronald Reagan was president, a group of moms, again, it's almost always been moms, had some kids with disabilities that needed some help. And they said, oh, we've got this nice building over here that you can place your children with. And those moms filed a lawsuit. And they said, we think we can do a better job. And actually, we think we can do it cheaper in our own homes and in our community. So Ronald Reagan, as president, reached a settlement with these moms to say, if you're willing to waive your right to an institution, I'll provide funding for home and community-based services. So that's what a waiver is.
Hmm.
It's a waiver of that theoretical right to an institution you never really wanted to begin with. So an institution is brick and mortar, but a waiver is more like a voucher. The family doesn't get money, they get a voucher for services depending on what kind of waiver you have. Dave's better at this, but I think we have seven. Is it seven waivers?
Yeah, so in Ohio, I think it's really confusing for people when we talk about waivers. So a lot of times people think, oh, well, these are these three waivers that are from the county board or from the Department of Developmental Disabilities, but all waivers are Medicaid and they have federal funding tied to them. So in Ohio, we have 7 total waivers. And Medicaid gives permission to the Department of Developmental Disabilities to run the 3 what we call DD waivers. So that's the level 1, the self waiver, and the IO or individual options. And remember how they're funded. Waivers are funded about 60% from the federal government, and then 40% from local levy dollars.
Right.
In most cases, I will say that, because
Right, on the
sometimes there
DD
are
side.
state-funded waivers.
So Medicaid is the authority
Yeah.
for all Medicaid card services and all waiver services. So that 60% from Washington all flows through the Department of Medicaid.
Yes.
But if you're a senior citizen, like I am, if you're 60 and over and you want to stay out of a nursing home, you waive your nursing home right to receive something called the passport waiver, which provides services in your own home. If you're birth to age 59 and you have medical challenges, those are your predominant issues, you can access something called the home care waiver, again, to keep you out of that theoretical right to a nursing home. You can be an infant who was born prematurely, and the fact that you were premature is your major issue. You can access the home care waiver. To access the home care waiver, and this is going to sound weird, it's administered in most areas by the Area Agency on Aging. So if you have a child or an adult up to the age of 59 and they're tube fed and on a respirator and have a lot of medical challenges, contact your local Area Agency on Aging. There is no waiting list for the home care waiver, but it's predominantly for medical needs, and you have to meet what's called a nursing level of care. But for all waivers, you have to be Medicaid eligible.
Okay.
So there is this rumor out there, this myth that, well, a kid with Down syndrome, an 8-year-old kid with Down syndrome, or a 10-year-old with autism is never going to qualify for a waiver because their parents live in $1 million home and they have 2 Lexuses in the driveway. If you're offered a waiver, the system essentially waives family income and assets and only looks at the person applying for the waiver's income and assets. So not many 8-year-olds have a lot of money.
Mhm.
Okay. So in Ohio, you have to have access to less than $2,000 and you're not making more than about $1,800 a month.
Yeah, but that's important because that's where like stable accounts and
Yes.
trusts
Absolutely,
and
yes.
things come in, because we all do want to save for our kids.
Right.
And there's really nice grandparents out there who are putting
Right.
together accounts for our kids. And then we're like, wait a minute. So
Yes. So
that's
even,
important.
and I got this question this morning. The system knows everything these days. So if mom has bought, or grandma bought $100 savings bond every year at the holiday time, that accumulates pretty fast.
Yes.
They know, the system knows because your child's Social Security number is on it. Medicaid is a health insurance program for people that are low income and low assets. But there are a lot of legal ways to protect people with developmental disabilities, especially that the stable account or well-created trust funds.
Yeah.
Just make sure your child doesn't have more than $2,000 to their name. Okay. So
Gary, can I
that's
ask a
requirement.
question?
Yeah.
why doesn't Medicaid just handle all these waivers then? Why do we have the county boards as part of our particular waivers? There's 3 DD waivers.
Well, for us, it goes back to I hate the turn of the century. Uh, Back in 99, 2000, the county boards of DD ran most supports for people with developmental disabilities. And unlike the rest of the country, we had local levies and local tax dollars that supported people with disabilities. But at the turn of the century, the steel mills where I grew up had been closing. The auto parts places started closing. Ford in the Toledo or the Lorain County area was closing, and we didn't have the local tax revenue. But the Department of Medicaid has always used state funding as that 40% match for senior citizens and people with medical issues.
Yeah.
But we had lots of local dollars. So a deal was struck that the Department of Developmental Disabilities would use those local dollars as the 40% match. And it just historical, it just, so DD uses their local levies to match the federal dollars. But now we come to 2023, 2024, there are, and it's a good thing, but people with disabilities are living longer than anyone ever imagined they would be living. I mean, when I started, if you had Down syndrome, you might make it to your 20s.
Mhm.
Now you live a long, healthy life, which is wonderful, but the longer you live, the more expensive you become. And Ohio is now, through its county boards and the Department of DD, supporting over 100,000 children and adults, compared to like 30 or 40,000 just 25 years ago. So the system has changed. So in this last state budget, we were able to get more state funding than we'd ever had before. That's one of the major changes, that as of July 1st, our providers have a 38% higher rate than they did a year ago. And most of that came from state funding.
And we have to continue to fight to
Right.
keep that, right? Or to have more increases come our way, because you got to remember, for 15 some years, we were not seeing hardly any increases in our system.
Right.
If we were, it was maybe like a 4% or a 6%, I think was the highest we had ever achieved before the last state budget.
So
And I want to remind people that waivers are a funding stream that follow you within Ohio. So as long as you meet the qualifications, you can live in Franklin County and move to Trumbull County, and it follows you. Now, you'll probably get what's called a reassessment done when you go to that new county, but it's a funding stream, and that's different in the sense than when you're talking about a private intermediate care facility or a state run, which are called developmental centers, where the funding, you have a right to leave at any time, but the funding stays with that bed.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So I think that's a very important difference in how that works.
Why do you need, why do we need a waiver if our children just need Medicaid? Like, so my son is autistic and he has a waiver, and it was, definitely necessary and everything's fine.
Right.
And he's got that Medicaid. You get the Medicaid once you get the waiver. My daughter has Down syndrome, so she has a disability. So what Medicaid is for people that are older and or poor or with a disability, right? That's a 3.
Well, yeah, but
Age blind or disabled.
Right,
Age
but
blind or
they all have the same financial qualifications. So it's something we're working on as an ARC on a national level. So think of Medicaid as the Obamacare of the 1960s.
Okay.
It's a health care plan for people that are poor or people that are age blind and disabled.
Right.
They all have the same criteria. You can't have more than $2,000 to your name or a certain income. So one of our goals on a national level is this Medicaid's a health insurance plan, but waivers are an optional benefit. So think of it like Blue Cross Blue Shield. I work for a pretty good organization who provides dental and vision. Those are optional benefits. Medicaid is exactly the same. Medicaid requires that it pay for hospitalization and doctor visits, but it doesn't require dental, vision, or waiver services. So what we are trying to do on a federal level is say that waivers are a mandated services under Medicaid. So if I qualify for Medicaid, so it wouldn't be a waiver as part of Medicaid, it would be home and community-based services
Okay.
are a required service under Medicaid, which would mean if I'm eligible for Medicaid, I'm eligible for what we know of as homemaker personal care.
Right.
I'm eligible for not only durable medical equipment, but assistive technology.
Yes.
I'm eligible for home modifications. We have some resistance in Congress, and frankly, we have some resistance from people that are worried because intermediate care facilities are also an optional benefit.
Okay.
But if I'm on Medicaid, and it's not it's not an optional benefit, why would I ever choose an intermediate care facility? There would be no need to.
Right.
The other thing is Medicaid is what's called an entitlement. If I meet the criteria, the eligibility criteria, I'm in.
Right.
They could put me on a waiting list. So the tens of thousands of people we have on waivers would automatically get their services. And as soon as a child became financially eligible, so some of us have been theorizing what would happen. I don't know if you want to go there on this podcast, but
Sure, we're open to that.
what I think would happen is county boards have millions of dollars in local dollars they're now spending on the match for waivers. But if all those people that are currently on a waiver were also Medicaid eligible, they would get their services through their Medicaid card and free up millions of dollars in local funds. So what would happen is I would get my home and community-based services through my Medicaid card. That would free up millions of dollars for children who are not eligible for Medicaid.
Right.
So your kids, Jen, wouldn't
Yeah.
have had to go through that Medicaid route. They would just use local dollars.
I like it. What do we have to do to advocate for this?
Well, that's on a congressional level in Washington. It's been a long-term goal.
Yeah.
Probably we can't do a whole lot into next year again.
Yeah, right.
Starts all over. But there have been bills introduced.
But I still don't
Years.
quite understand why, like I applied for Medicaid for Evie, not knowing when she
Right.
was born, thinking she's disabled, and I
Yeah.
was denied. I
It-
don't understand that piece because she has a disability, and I thought that's what Medicaid was for. But I make too much money
That's it.
for her to
Yeah.
have it. But why?
If you're
But
if you're
she,
if you're under 18, there's still that section. They
Yes.
look at all family income and assets.
but Jack gets his waiver with the Medicaid, even
Right.
though he's not 18, because they only looked at
Because
him.
he had
Because
an
he had the
offer
offer of the waiver in hand. Yeah.
a
And they're
waiver
allowed to do
waives
that.
family income and assets.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just
Confused. Yeah,
that's the other reason a waiver is really important.
it is.
Mhm.
Because there is no entitlement to a waiver. But once you have a waiver, you have an entitlement for everything it provides as long as you qualify.
Yeah.
So if you bought Jack a lottery ticket and he won the lottery, or someone left him more than $2,000, he would lose his Medicaid card and his waiver.
Yeah.
Or if he woke up tomorrow and didn't act like a stereotypical person with autism, he would lose his waiver. You always have to be financially eligible for Medicaid, and you always have to function at a developmental disability level of care. And on the home care waiver, this is what really harms a lot of our little kids. They get on the home care waiver as a preemie to
Yep.
get out of the hospital. So they have a Medicaid card and a waiver, and thank God they get better. As soon as they get better, they lose their waiver, and then they also lose their Medicaid card. We have functional definitions of disability in Ohio. So we have people with Down syndrome who don't qualify for a waiver because they don't function like a person with Down syndrome in 1967, which is
I
when
think
most of our
I
rules
think
were
that
written.
part's hard for families, right? I think
Yeah.
that's because it's not about the fact that your loved one has autism or down, So it's about that functional definition. And that's hard, especially when you're talking about the positives and dream your dreams throughout the educational system. And then you're going towards a county board system. And it's like, well, it's based on the negative. So I think that's really hard, that transition for families.
Yeah,
So
that's
part
why
of
I
that
tell a lot
entrance,
of families to get into therapy when they start this process of getting a needs assessment, because I don't think there was anything more
oh,
stressful and like shameful for my own self
huh?
as going through that process, and which I hate that it's that way and it shouldn't be that way. And every time I talk to a family member, I make sure I tell them that I'm in this with them and I did this too, and it's hard and awful, but yes, like this is not easy asking for help and then being basically shamed for asking for help. And
It's our
It's
system
really, it's, yeah,
just to
it's
get in
really,
the door, it's based on the negative.
yeah,
You have to talk about
yeah.
Dave and I repeatedly say, describe your child on Saturday night when the meds have worn off.
yeah.
Mhm.
I
That's,
think
well,
that's the
Lindsay, you
challenge
went through
though. I
that with
mean,
your son. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, from my opinion and what I see out there is that's hard for first off for families to come to that, right? To have to say, and oftentimes there's a fear of I'm going to say this about my loved one and someone's going to come and take my kid away.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Something's
Yeah.
going to happen like that. So that is very, very scary and intimidating for that family.
Right.
It
And I
is.
want
You
to
are
talk a
putting
little
it
bit.
out
Go
there. You're
ahead.
putting the worst things out there on a
Mhm.
public
Yes.
record that your family has endured.
Right.
Yeah.
You're saying, here's this information that I would probably never tell anybody about. And here it is in order to ask for the help that you need. And really you have a right to have, but it's
Absolutely.
so important. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm a firm believer in that. I don't think our system should be this complicated to navigate for families. But I also understand when we talk about federal, state, county dollars, that there is going to be some sort of hurdles to get through that or navigate that. And I think that's the system set up that way intentionally.
Yes.
I
Mhm.
don't believe it should be, but again, I realize that when you're talking about billions and billions of dollars, which I hate even talking about that because we're talking about someone's way of life. And they have the same rights as you and I to walk down the street and get mugged. We don't want that to happen, but who are we to say as a system you don't have the right to walk down that sidewalk?
But you're right that Medicaid's the biggest part of our budget, like in
Yep.
Ohio. So when,
Absolutely.
when I got to go through that budget process for the first time with the, advocating for those direct support professional increases, like you talked about, Gary, I was kind of shocked to see just the line items and like Medicaid and that pie chart is more than half of our budget.
It's huge. It's
It
huge.
is a huge amount. It's billions of dollars. And I think what's always been sort of scary to me is when we talk about our Ohio 2-year budget cycle is it's really based on projections, right? It's based on tax revenues and all these things. And what happens if we don't hit those goals or what we think we're going to do? Do
Right.
we then look at a possible cut? Because that's really scary.
And Congress and especially our legislature is beginning to understand how many there are of us. So I said currently, the county boards and the Department of DD are serving about 100,000, a little more than 100,000 people right now. We estimate there are more than 300,000 Ohioans that qualify for the label of developmental disability. So there's about 100,000 people who blend in to the
Mhm.
system. They go through with an IEP, the school system, and they graduate, and they've learned enough skills to blend into society. But there's that other 100,000. We estimate it's over 150,000 children in school on their way. And the people currently in the system are going to live long, healthy lives. So there are estimates that we could double the number of people we need to support in the next decade. And when people begin to figure that out, that gets scary financially. But to go back to how do I get a waiver? The entrance criteria is you have to be Medicaid eligible, and that's the child, not the family. The child can't have more than $2,000 to their name. They have to meet the determination of you do have a developmental disability, which means you became disabled before the age of 22. So I have a neighbor that I helped get on a waiver a number of years ago, but his parents never wanted to tell him he had autism. He still doesn't know. He's got a waiver. He's doing really, really well. So, but you have to have documentation. So that we have some senior citizens that never had their kids enter the DD system. School records are lost. Mom and dad pass away, and this 60-year-old has no documentation that they got diagnosed before the age of 22. So they don't qualify. We have a number of adults now being diagnosed with autism, but they never got the label before the age of 22, so they don't qualify. So get the diagnosis. Diagnosis alone is not going to make you eligible. You have to function, but you know, it is what it is. You have to have some kind of documentation, and don't trust that your school is going to keep records.
That's right.
Schools burn down. Don't trust your doctor is always going to be there. Instead of burning the things you want to burn, keep the stuff somewhere. And it's not about keeping it in the back of your head. You need to keep physical documentation.
Yes.
Email, electronic is fine, but know that our system electronically will not be the system in a decade.
That's right.
Right.
If it was, I'd still have a cassette player with my choir music on it, you know?
It's true.
I think you might have an 8-track, man.
Well, I do. But it's the cassette of my junior musical in high school that my dad sat and taped on his cassette player under the auditorium seat or his lap. That's lost forever, you know? But keep a physical document. It's not just your IEP. So a lot of kids will graduate with a learning disability. That doesn't cut it. It has to have things like autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, Rett syndrome, Prader-Willi. Those things help. Even a diagnosis of an intellectual disability, if it has the word Asperger's, that doesn't count anymore. You know, I tell a lot of folks that have kids with what was called Asperger's, say your child's on the spectrum. You know, you're not telling a lie, but there are certain diagnoses that no longer are relevant anymore.
Yeah.
And as funding gets tighter, the door starts to shut on who's eligible. So it's the worst of the worst paperwork that you keep.
Gary, what about ADHD?
No, it doesn't count.
That's why I want to put that out there, guys. ADHD does not count.
No, but ADHD combined with something else probably would. Dave's oldest son, didn't he have ADHD?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of kids do, but a lot of times I see kids and I'm like, oh, that's autism, you know, and it's an extreme form of ADHD that they're kind of dealing with, and the parents can like wrap their head around the ADHD, and they did not want that autism diagnosis on their child. And I'm like, but I cringe because I'm like, your child's now 14. They've got like not many years to get that diagnosis in by 22.
And we've got to retrain ourselves. I mean, I interact, when a parent calls me, I'll say, tell me about your child.
Yeah.
Well, he's 22 and he's at risk or he's delayed. Those are good things to keep here, but at-risk kids and delayed kids don't get waivers.
Right.
You know, and at 22, if I still can't count to 10 and identify a quarter, some of this is like, okay. The other thing during the assessments, be there.
Yes.
Mhm.
Be there.
Yes.
I can't tell you the number of people I have interacted with over the years who went to the Medicaid office and their child was clean, well dressed, well groomed, looked great, and had a 30-second loop that if asked a question would answer it, and they disqualify themselves. When you go to the Medicaid office, when you go to the Social Security office, disability has a different meaning. Disability in their eyes, especially if you're an adult, means I'm not able to hold down a full-time job. It's something called substantial gainful employment. And if I don't look and act and present myself as a person with a disability, I'm not going to qualify for Medicaid, which means I'm not going to qualify for the waiver. So my advice to families is if your child looks and acts like they have a disability, take them with you. If they don't, leave them at home. An adult can sign a statement saying my mom is my authorized representative to deal with Medicaid or Social Security.
Yeah.
And mom can, without their son sitting there, say the things she needs to say to get the Medicaid eligible. Because there will be caseworkers that will look at your child, your young adult, and say, can you work? Do you want to work?
Right.
If they're verbal, they will say yes, and they just disqualified themselves.
Yeah, Gary, I think like when you are a parent and you're doing like help me grow, with your child, your pediatrician sent you over to help me grow and you do all that. That's your time with the county board. And then you leave help me grow and then you're with the school district dealing with your IEP. So then you're like, God, I'm underwater. Why can't I, the daycare is not taking my kid. I can't do this. I can't go back to work. What's happening? This is where you're thinking, and this is where this waiver information might start to enter your head. What
Right.
does a parent do? Like, do you just call your county board and say, I want a waiver? What do you do?
Okay, you will. So the assessment tools for waiver eligibility are being rewritten right now. The drafts are out. They won't become effective till July of 2025. When those become effective, it will be again, I need a waiver. Right now, it's I have a need, and you have to express a need that is above and beyond what a typical parent would be legally responsible to do. That's hard if your child's under 18.
Mm-hmm.
But at 18, you don't have any legal responsibility. So it's just as hard at 18 to say, I can't do it. I'm not doing it. There is actually a needs assessment. It's several pages long. It's on our website, thearkofohio.org. Practice, sit with a loved one and talk about your needs. Sometimes the need is my son has cerebral palsy and I can't lift him. That's hard for a parent to say, I can't do that.
Yeah.
But you have to. And the county board has the legal right to say, and get a doctor's statement saying, Gary, you can't lift him.
Yeah.
People get offended by that. Or I was just diagnosed with breast cancer and I can't chase my kid anymore.
Right.
I'm going through chemo. Get documentation. You provide documentation that you do indeed have breast cancer. I mean, it puts us, it is a system based on negatives, and you have to jump through the hoops until we can get it
Well, and the
fixed.
county board, like the SSA you're dealing with, is sending that info to Medicaid, right?
Right.
So
Yes.
sometimes they often come back to you and say, hey, I need this documentation. And you're like, you know what? You have what you need. And they're like, actually, if I just send the right doctor's note to Medicaid with this information, I know it'll go through. When I don't have that documentation, maybe it will. But, you're dealing with Medicaid, guys. So it's like much
Exactly.
different than dealing with like human beings at your county board that you've been talking to since you were working on
Yes.
help me grow kind of stuff. This is like
Right.
a
And if
very
you're
much of a denial, you know, documented system,
right. And if you're at the Job and Family Services office, you've been offered a waiver for your 8-year-old, and you know they're not supposed to count your income, but they still ask for it, play the game because
Mm-hmm.
they can't get to the next page.
Right.
Lindsay, you just went through this with your
Yeah.
son, and
Yep.
it was like, oh my God, why do you need to know? Well, I can't get to the next page.
I'm pretty sure I emailed you a couple of times and was like, am I supposed to like tell people this? Because I feel like we're gonna lose it if I'm honest.
Yeah. Well, what they do is they put it in and then they delete it. It doesn't count. And when I questioned them, they said, well, there might be other things we could offer the family. Well, dad makes $300,000 a year. I don't think there's anything else you can offer this family. But Gary, we need that. We have to have it. It's and to play the game,
Mm-hmm.
it's the only way your child's going to become Medicaid eligible.
Yeah.
And
I've
again,
seen parents not submit it, to be honest. Like it
oh
just
well,
takes
yeah,
it takes longer, but and you might get a denial. And like why
right,
even take the risk? So just
right.
I agree with you. Just give
And
them the
and
info.
it depends on where you live, also in the state.
Yeah.
It shouldn't, but if I live in a rural county, they know me, they know my family, they've known my kid since he was born. If I live in one of the metropolitan areas, those caseworkers at Job and Family Services are generalists. They're doing everything. They know nothing about developmental disabilities. They only know the form that they're filling out. And if you can't give them the information, they're not going to be able to be helpful because they're worried about, they're also doing unemployment, and food stamps and everything else. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, there are some counties where there is a specialist at JFS, or some counties where actually a Job and Family Services employee will be at the county board to help you through the process. So it really just depends on where you're at. Get to know people, get to know your county commissioners. Your county commissioners appoint the county board members
Yes.
as well as the probate judge. Get to know them, play the politics. Um, it does help. Every county board has a county board meeting once a month.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the county board meetings and sit in the front row. Take your child with you, so that they know, because it is a human service system. People that they know will get help.
Yeah, and actually run for county or for your
Yes.
board
Yeah.
of DD if you're a
Yes.
parent or a person with
Uh-huh.
a disability listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
other thing I think I would add, sorry, is always pay attention to what's happening at the state level and the state budget and also at the federal level.
Yes.
So for example, in 2025, there's going to be debate in Congress about policies that affect Medicaid. So pay attention to that stuff because it might take a while, but it will trickle down if there are changes at the federal level.
Right. So I wanted to stress some of the changes that have happened in the
Okay.
last 8 months. So we have 3 waivers, as David mentioned, the level 1, the self, and the IO waiver. We received a 38 point something percent increase in the rates we pay our providers. So as a result, our budgets on all 3 waivers went up. If I have a level 1 or a self waiver and I'm still in school, I have a $41,424 budget. I talked to an SSA the other day that did not know that budget increase took effect on January 1. She was apologetic. She just didn't know. So parents have to know. If you have a child on the level 1 or the self waiver, it's an annual budget of $41,424. If you have an adult out of school, you now have an annual budget of $62,136. That's significant.
Yeah.
So you can get quite a bit of service with 62,000 because you have the 62,000 in waiver funding and the Medicaid card. So many families are, and we could have a whole other session on what can I access with my Medicaid
I
card?
think we should have another session just
Yes,
on that.
we'll
'Cause
schedule it.
Yeah, there is so much you can get just if you
Yeah.
have Medicaid
Yeah.
that because there's never a book. If you have private insurance, they send you a book.
Yeah.
If you have Medicaid, they don't send you a book.
No.
You don't know what you have available and how to get it.
Well, and we're just constantly denied. Like, even if you think you should, even if it was in some list, we're still denied for some reason every single
even if
thing.
your doctor says it's medically necessary,
That's
you're
right.
often denied. So those are the budgets for the level one and the self waiver. The state has contracted with a company to look at all of our waivers.
Mhm.
We expect that sometime in the next several years, the level one and the self waiver will be combined
Okay.
into one waiver, taking the best of both. There is a long time promise. No one will lose any services. We'll just combine them and make it simpler and really more transparent with the same budget amount. If you're on the IO waiver, there are, Dave, remind me how many funding ranges?
There are 9 funding ranges.
Yes.
So again, what I want to go back just real quick. So when you talk about that waiver budget, remember, just because someone has that total waiver budget, it's about assessed need. So it doesn't mean everyone gets that $62,000. And in fact, remember, it's reimbursement for services that are delivered. So you still have the challenge of finding providers to deliver the service, and then it's reimbursement. It's not like somebody hands you $62,000 and says, here you go.
Right.
So on the IO, there's 9 funding ranges. And also remember, when we're talking about waivers, there's 8 cost of doing business categories. So counties are broken down into that. So that has a factor. And on the IO waiver, you also have what's called the ODDP, the Ohio Developmental Disability Profile, and then also the AI, Acuity Instrument for day services. Does that help you out there, Gary?
That was a lot.
It does. So if I've got
Sorry.
if I've got an IO waiver, an individual options waiver, it's going to go from about 62,000 up to the average cost of living in a state institution, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars. You get what the funding range based on this developmental disability profile.
Yeah.
If I live at home with my parents, I will automatically be at the lowest funding range because the state assumes, unless you tell them otherwise, that as mom and dad, you're going to do lots of free help. So you have to be able to express what, as a parent, you're doing above and beyond what a typical parent is legally responsible to do. And remember, at 18, you're not legally responsible to do anything. And it also, during this assessment, it's important to talk about the things you don't want to talk about. Anything of a sexual nature has to be talked about. Elopement or running away has to be talked about. Um, Physical aggression has to be talked about. I have a dear friend in Northern Ohio who has 2 kids, currently 2 young adults, currently on waivers. I helped her through the entire due process and she lost. And in the parking lot, she said to me, "Oh, Gary, I'm so glad my black eye healed up. I would have been embarrassed." Her son punched her in the eye the week before, but she didn't want to tell anyone about that. Her other son had run away, not on purpose. She said, "Go walk the dog." She knew that walking the dog calmed him down, and he took the dog onto a major highway. We went back in the building and told those stories, and they both got waivers. But you have to talk about that. And the funding ranges depend on, again, the negative or the needs.
The need, yeah.
The needs. So you get the IO waiver because of your needs. If I've got a level one waiver and I have a $62,000 budget and I've only spent 40, regardless of why I only spent 40, maybe I couldn't find a provider. but I want an IO waiver. You're not going to qualify for an IO waiver because you're still alive. You're still functioning. And the state will actually say, well, you only spent 40 and we made 62,000 available. How do you feel that? How did you do this? Well, I pitched in as dad. Okay. Your need was met. You pitched in. So if you have a level one in yourself, use it. There are ways to use it. Even if you can't find a staff person, maybe you need assistive technology. Maybe you need home modification. There are lots of ways. So the self waiver, you can use all of your self waiver for something called participant directed goods and services. I've got a scheduled call with a mom this afternoon whose son is 16. He's on the autism spectrum and he's learning to drive, and dad is trying to teach him. The self waiver could pay for a driving instructor through participant directed goods and services. And I'm sure this mom doesn't know that. It is so open in what you could do with the waiver.
Yeah. I like how there is some more flexibility as for parents, especially parents of,
right.
We knew parents of adult children could be like their provider.
Right.
And now there's a little bit more leeway in the law for parents of minors because Gary, I couldn't hire somebody to help teach Jack, like for some of the things like that, because it would have to be me or would have to be my husband. And so and a lot of parents are in that same boat because autism is so relational and it's we can't just hire someone off the street like I could for Evie. Evie, I could hire anybody and she would be like,
yes, I don't know her well, but I think she would love having an 18-year-old girl take her shopping.
100%. Yes.
It depends on the person.
But can you talk a little bit about the parents of minors and
so this was something we had available during the pandemic, and we encouraged the state to adopt it as of January 1. So as of January 1 of 2024, on all our waivers, this is a Medicaid rule. It's not a Department of Developmental Disability rules. This applies to all legally responsible persons. So we say parents of minor children, but if you're on the passport waiver and you're a senior citizen, prior to January 1, your husband could not be paid to support you if you had dementia. Now they can. Prior to January 1, globally, if you had a 17-year-old and you couldn't find a provider, you couldn't be paid. So the rule was adopted with a lot of caveats.
Yes.
So first of all, you've got to prove you can't find a provider.
Right.
And that's the biggest stumbling block.
Yeah.
Because I don't want just anyone in my house.
Yeah.
Right.
But, if someone knocks on the door and says, hey, I'm a provider, I know CPR, first aid, I smell, but let me work with your kid, or I smoke and you're a smoke-free house, let me work with my kid, or I'm 450 pounds and I can't bend over, but your son has cerebral palsy and needs to be lifted off the ground. Well, I'm qualified.
Or chased, or like they're an elopement.
Or chased, yes, all of that. So you've got to get through the hurdle of not being able to find anyone else.
Yep.
Counties are given a lot of leeway on this one. Especially we have a smoke-free house. My child has an autoimmune disorder. I can't allow just anyone in. You get through that, and then the county board or any part of the system has to complete an extraordinary care instrument. And I have to have a score in 3 or more areas. It's supposed to measure the legal responsibility of a parent above and beyond what a typical So if I'm 16 or 17, the likelihood that my mom or dad could get paid is higher than if I have a 3-year-old. Because 3-year-olds need a lot of parental stuff. But you go through that process. if you can't find anyone else, your child is determined requiring extraordinary care. Mom and or dad could be hired by an agency. They can't be an independent provider. And the parent can't, or legally responsible person can't work more than 40 hours in 1 week. So I count on both my mom and dad. Together, they can't be paid more than 40 hours. But if I've got an 18-year-old older brother, they can be paid.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of concern from families who, my 16-year-old child has an IO waiver. I'm authorized for 60 hours a week of service. Well, if they meet all these conditions, dad could be employed for 40 hours and someone else outside the home could be 20. Or if there's an older sibling in the house. But an older sibling is not legally responsible. This only applies to people who are legally responsible. Not everyone's going to qualify. We got our foot in the door.
Yes.
With all of these rules, you can believe that we're in there asking for change. Our position at the very beginning is all parents should be allowed to be paid. And if they met level of care, they've met extraordinary care.
Yeah.
I mean, we got pushback from the departments and primarily Medicaid on that. But we're not stopping the push on that.
Yeah, I think the other piece to it too, Jen and Lindsay, is just the way the rule is written. It's not real clear in how it gets interpreted across 88 counties.
Right.
Right.
So for example, if you have this window of like, you can do a search for providers at the county board every 2 to 6 months. If I get one response, does that count? Or how does that work? And I think that's where I'm seeing a lot of what I would call roadblocks. That, oh, well, they said they got one request, but this is not someone that I would ever accept to provide care to my family member.
Right.
But if I say that, then I'm like, I'm kind of kicked out. I don't qualify. So it's just not a real clear the way the rule is written. So, and Gary knows how much I'm about the rule has to be very clear, so there's no misinterpretation.
So the latest in this is we also have a behavior rule on what our direct support staff can and cannot do. So the department is working on guidance. So what if I've been approved? I'm a paid provider for my 10-year-old, and I think 10-year-olds should go to bed at 8:30. Am I allowed to say that? And so the department is going to come out with a guidance to counties that not everything has to go to a human rights committee. The children are still children, whether they're on a waiver or not. And I can restrict my child to the yard. I can tell my child they can't watch HBO. I can tell my child certain things that I can't tell my 18-year-old son legally. I'll still tell them. But if I'm paid by the system will say, you're paid. You happen to be mom, but you're being paid and you got to follow all the same rules. So even though I'm a parent, I have to go through a background check. I have to do CPR and first aid training, and I have to do all the same training as anyone else. And if my child's a minor, I have to work through an agency. There are agencies out there that will not employ parents of minors because they're worried that, oh, I'm going to invest all of this time to employ and train you, and then you'll find another provider in 6 months and I've lost all that. We don't believe that here. We have a different philosophy. We're going to support you.
Yeah.
So and again, it really depends on what county you're in, how strict they are in interpreting these rules.
I think you pointed out some of the difficulties of those discussions, right? Early on was like, okay, this is a little different when we're paying a parent of a minor, and how is that really going to work in those kind of situations? Am I allowed to restrict food from them? Am I allowed to do these kind of things? If I'm paid by the system, it kind of opens up a different door. So how do we
Yeah.
manage that? How do we get some common sense in some of the rules and these things? But I don't know. It's
And
really
I would think
challenging.
that would affect some like MUI, like reporting kind
The
of thing.
MUI and UI
Absolutely.
reporting is very, as a system, even with adults, like if I don't have my med cert pass, I can't just clock out and then clock, and pass that med and then clock back in. The system does not want you doing that.
So
Right.
one of the questions that's come up recently, even on the DD side. So I'm on a waiver. Let's say I'm on the IO waiver, and I live with my girlfriend. My girlfriend is not legally responsible to do anything. Therefore, my girlfriend is allowed to be my provider. But by rule, I'm not allowed to have a sexual relationship with my girlfriend because my girlfriend's now a paid provider, and that's prohibited. So how's that apply to a husband and wife on a passport waiver? I'm not allowed to have a sexual
Yeah.
relationship with my wife. So they're refining a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding this all was agreed to during the pandemic. And then, okay, let's get it done on January 1 and we'll figure out the details. So there's a lot of stuff. I don't want an incident report filed against me because I had sexual relationships with my wife.
Right.
It's,
Crazy.
yeah. There's just a
It's
lot of
tricky.
stuff.
It's tricky.
It is. But if I live with her, not a big deal. I can get a divorce and do all of that. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
can't have sexual relations, but
Right.
it's just, or I clock out,
Right.
I
Well,
clock
on that
out.
note, gosh, guys,
Yes,
it's happening.
yes.
Thanks so
It's
much for
9
stopping
p.m. It's
by.
9 p.m. My time's up. Wink and a
We always
nod.
end. We always end on like such an awkward note, Gary. It's so funny.
Love it.
But let's do something on what I can get with my Medicaid card.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
definitely.
understanding managed care.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, if any of you all who are listening have questions that you think that Gary and Dave could answer, maybe the next one we have, we'll do like some question and answers too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we
Yeah.
get a lot of the same questions over and over again. That's why I kind of wanted to do this podcast, because I kind of want to send this to some of my families and say, hey, just listen to this, and then you'll kind of understand. There's nobody who explains waivers in this system better than Gary and Dave. So
You guys do an
Um,
amazing job.
send us
Well,
some
and call-
questions to Jen and Lindsay.
Call us.
Yeah, call us anytime.
It's 614-487-4720. We have one call-in number for the entire state, or you can email at info@thearcofohio.org, and that will get to any of our staff as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you
Yes,
both.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.